Hello, my name is Richa. I work with the Center for Environmental Law at WWF India as an environmental law professional. I hope all of you are enjoying your course on environmental law and the other modules are going very well. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a very specific module called the Disaster Management and Environment module. What are we going to talk about in this module is that I'm first going to take you through the definitions of what a disaster is, what disaster management is, how is climate change a very relevant issue in today's times, how is climate change related to disaster management, what are the different kinds of disasters, what are natural disasters, what are man-made disasters, and in the end, I will take you shortly through the administrative and the institutional framework for disaster management in the country, right? Why are we learning about disaster management? Because we are trying to understand what the relationship between the changing climate right now and the disasters is. We are trying to see how we can incorporate climate change awareness into disaster management in India and across the world. And we're trying to see what is India's response to this. How is climate change, how is the changing world political situation in context to climate change, how is that impacting India and what are we doing about it, right? I will start with what is a disaster. Now, as a layperson, you would think a disaster is anything that creates destruction. It destroys lives, it destroys property, it destroys livelihoods, it results in degradation of the environment, and that is how the law also defines it. The Disaster Management Act of 2005 defines disaster in very similar terms. It says that it's a catastrophe, mishap, calamity, or grave occurrence which arises from natural or man-made causes, and it results in loss of life and property, degradation of the environment, and most importantly, it is beyond the capacity of the community of the affected area. And therefore, the government needs to put in measures, first, to proactively control disasters, to not let them happen in the first place, and secondly, have a post-disaster strategy in place on how to rescue, what are the relief measures that we are going to put in, and how are we going to evacuate the people, right? Now, what is disaster management? Now, disaster management has grown over time. India initially used to have a very relief-centric approach to disaster management, but we've changed that slowly, and now we've turned to a more continuous and integrated process of planning, of organizing, of coordinating and implementing methods of preventing disasters proactively and post disaster, which is prompt response and, like I said, relief and rescue. Moving to the next point, what are the types of disasters? The first type is natural disasters. Natural disasters are something that you've heard of, that you know of. Natural disasters are storms, natural disasters are hurricanes, natural disasters are storms. These are all natural disasters. Man-made disasters, on the other hand, are disasters that are human-induced, that we have brought upon our people. For example, a stampede, a gas leak, a flood which is caused by water released from a dam. These are all man-made disasters. Now, are we more concerned with natural disasters or man-made disasters? In the world, natural disasters have been dealt with for centuries, but man-made disasters are a new age thing that we've brought upon ourselves. What do we do when human populations or, due to our development, due to our demand needs, there are disasters that happen? So, there is a certain law. So, before I move on to, the institutional mechanism and the legal mechanism for disaster management, I would like to let you know a little bit about what is the law for man-made disasters, or what is the responsibility of a person who induces man-made disasters, right? Now, one of the most famous cases in liability that is related to a disaster comes from Rylands and Fletcher's, where the term strict liability was adopted. What is strict liability? In very basic terms, strict liability means if on my property I am doing a hazardous activity or any sort of activity which results in hazardous circumstances, is affecting other people, then it is my responsibility to control that situation, right? For example, I have a small plant on my land and I am letting out toxic waste from my plant into the stream flowing nearby. It is my responsibility that that stream does not flow into another person's land, right? So this basically is strict liability. Now there is another term called absolute liability. What is absolute liability? Absolute liability is a term that was introduced in India when we were referring to strict liability. In India, absolute liability means that there is a stronger liability on the person who has any sort of activity which leads to hazardous circumstances. What is absolute liability? It means that it does not matter if I have taken all precautions possible to contain that hazardous activity, and even then people have got affected by it. For example, if I have a factory on my land and some toxic flows out of the river, even though I have taken all precautions, I've put in all the measures, I have a plant which contains all the toxins, even then some toxins is released into the river or the stream, and the people living downstream have been affected by it. That means that even though in court I should be able to prove that I took all measures, this should not come back to me, I am not responsible for it. But according to the principle of absolute liability, if you have a factory set up which releases any sort of toxic material, you are responsible for it no matter what, right? One of the biggest examples for this is the Bhopal gas tragedy, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. The Bhopal gas tragedy led to about 500,000 people getting exposed to a very toxic gas. The case is still going on. In fact, the Bhopal gas tragedy was the reason why the Environment Protection Act was introduced in India. It is also one of the most popular cases which gained world-wide popularity because the case was also taken to the US, where we realized that you cannot, even though in the Bhopal gas tragedy, the company stated that it was not their responsibility entirely, but the court said that it is entirely their responsibility because the leak happened from their factory. Another case, which is a very relevant, very recent case that I would like to talk to you about, is the Alaknanda hydropower plant project. I talked to you about natural disasters and man-made disasters. There is also a term in the middle, which is a disaster which can happen due to natural consequences, but also has a man-made consequence to it. If you all remember, in the Uttarakhand floods of 2013, there was a lot of damage caused by the flash floods. A lot of people died. A lot of property was destroyed. Downstream, a lot of people were affected. Rishikesh was destroyed. But one thing that came out of it was that residents of a particular area challenged in the National Green Tribunal against Alaknanda hydropower plant for the fact that the power plant did not responsibly dispose of the muck that was generated in the plant. Do you think it was the lack of responsibility of the power plant, or do you think because of the floods, the muck got washed down and added to the damage? The court thought that it was the responsibility of the power plant. It was the lack of responsibility on behalf of the Alaknanda hydropower plant which led to additional damage. The court also said this is not an act of God. This is lack of responsibility on your part, and therefore very recently about rupees 9.26 crores were given as compensation to the people.